been talking about Christian living, and he's been coming from the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount. I'm thankful for the Sermon on the Mount. I'm thankful for the word that's being preached. And I've been tasked today to teach you with regard to what we refer to as the Lord's Prayer. But actually, it's the disciples' prayer, because this is a prayer that God taught his disciples to pray and teaches us to pray. Just to set the stage, Jesus is teaching the Sermon on the Mount, and he has now taught the Beatitudes. And those of us who have been going to church, we've heard the Beatitudes taught, and we've heard the Lord's Prayer, the disciples' prayer taught, but possibly not during the same sermon, because that would be a very long sermon. I suspect that the Sermon on the Mount may have been a very long sermon because it actually encompassed Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And so all of the Beatitudes and the things that pastor has been preaching about Christian living, those things are a part of the same sermon as we go into the Lord's Prayer. So we have not convened and come back. We are still on the Mount. We are still being taught. And this is not something separate, something different, but this is a part of the same sermon. And so as we go through this, we want to bear in mind just what the Beatitudes teaches us about. I mean, this is some Christian living. This is not good living. This is God living. This is not eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. This is, if you try and take my eye, I'm going to give you mine. If you try and take my hand, I'm going to give you mine. This is different than what we grew up believing, even what the holy people at that time grew up practicing. So while it was always God's intent, the way it was enacted came out differently. In our lives, there are things that are God's intent for our lives, and we take and see maybe a part of it and miss the whole. And so Jesus has now come not to take away what we've learned, but to show us truly what he meant. I remember as a child, mom saying, clean your room, and I did something that I thought was in line with what she meant. But when she came to inspect, to see had I done a good job, it turns out that what I did and what I thought needed to be done, the things that I thought were important were lesser than important, and the things that she deemed important weren't exactly the same. And there have been many times in my life where you're working on the job and your boss says, I need you to do this. And then when you come and he looks over it, or it's given to whoever needs to look at it, say, well, this is not exactly what I asked for. Or times in marriage when my wife may have said, can you do this? And I've done in my mind to the T exactly what she said. But then when it comes time for, I don't want to call it an inspection, but the moment when she says, good job, she says, well, what are you doing? Like, what did you do? And it turns out that what I did just wasn't, there was a disconnect. And so there was a disconnect with the way we were living, as we weren't called Christians yet, but the way we were living, there was a disconnect between what God intended for us. And so he came and he preached this very powerful sermon. And he came from this, or he spoke, and they described it as this. Matthew, the 6th chapter, will start at the 5th verse. And when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But thou, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet. When thou hast shut thy door, pray to thy Father which is in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. But when you pray, use not vain repetitions as the heathen do, for they think that they shall be heard for their much speaking. Be not ye therefore like unto them, for your Father knoweth what things you have need of before you ask him. And in this manner, therefore, pray ye. And those that know it can read along, can recite along. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. And so he sets the stage here. First, giving them example of how not to be, what not to do. He says, when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites. Now, hypocrites, I think those of us who've grown up in church or been saved a while have probably, most of us, either called someone a hypocrite or been called a hypocrite at least once in our saved life. I imagine if someone's unsaved, they probably, at least once in their unsaved life, called someone a hypocrite or been called a hypocrite. Now, when we're called that, typically the person means you're not practicing what you're preaching. Like you're talking about one thing on the left, but on the right, you're doing something else. Hypocrites. The word hypocrites comes from, this word is hard for me to say, hypokrites. I'll spell it for you, Hypokrites. The Greek origin of this word is actually an actor or a stage player, a pretender, a hypocrite. This is someone who is playing a role. Now, as I began to study this and hear from God, the word that stood out to me was an actor. So this is a person who we think of an actor. We know actors in Hollywood, right? Some people may not know them personally, but these are people who play a role for a part. And when they play the role, what determines their success is whether the role is believable. Whether when Denzel Washington comes in and plays the role, I can see him as John Q. Or when someone plays whatever role they play, I see them not as the person they are, but the person in the role that they are playing. These hypocrites were playing a role. There was something that they expected people to expect from them, and they wanted to line up with that role. It said they prayed aloud so that they may be seen, so that people can see them, and by being seen, they could be declared that their works are good. Like modern day, if we see the movie, the person gets an Oscar. But the Oscar and the money is their reward. Likewise, the hypocrite, the actor, being seen, and whatever people say, he prayed good, that's their reward. Oh, she sings well, that's their reward. And when we find ourselves playing the role for the purpose of being seen, that's what we get. We are seen. Now in Hollywood, there's different type of actors. There's the classical actor. The classical actor is what they do is they study their lines very well, and they stick to the script pretty closely. And so you won't see a lot of improv and things like that. You read the line to them, they're going to recite the line right back to you. This is what they take pride in, their precision in playing the role exactly as written. This may be someone who faithfully, I'll start with the world, faithfully every Monday, they're going to say it's another Manic Monday. Faithfully every Monday, they say, you got a case of the Fridays. Faithfully every Wednesday, it's Hump Wednesday. They can't even find it in themselves to have a good Wednesday because it has to be Hump Wednesday. Have played the role for so long, and their precision in playing the role is dictated by a call and a response. How you doing today? I'm blessed and highly favored. Some days we don't feel like it, but we still say. Now, there is a speaking those things that aren't as though they were. But some of us have gotten to the point where we are reading from the script. These people, it's hard to get a genuine answer from them because they're always reading from the script, because their intention is for you to see them a certain way. And so I can't tell you, it's been a rough week, because I have to say the words verbatim, I'm blessed and highly favored. When things go wrong in the economy and I look and my bank account is low, and I thank God that wasn't our testimony. But we have people looking, they see their bank account is low and they say, I'm too blessed to be stressed. I'm too blessed to be recessed. But their bank account is recessed. And so instead of speaking over a situation that exists, what God says, we just go along with the script. Classical actors. And then there is the method actor. The method actor, the method hypocrite, isn't just reading off a script. when they are preparing for a role, become that person. And so when you see them in the movie, before they shot that movie, for months leading up to that movie, they were in character. When they were in their house eating, they were in character. When they were driving around the city and things, if their character was a road rage character, they would have road rage, because that is the character they get engrossed in this role. And the danger of a method actor is the line between who they really are and the role they're playing sometimes gets confused. And so we have some of us that have elevated from the classical actor who just memorizes the lines, but have gotten engrossed, but still in a role that is not truly who we are. The problem with being in a role that is not truly who you are is you can never do that well enough. I look at Mike. Mike's got that beautiful blue bass over there, and he plays that thing so well. That bass, Mike came over my house one day and saw that bass and desired it, and we made a deal for him to he now owns it. But I owned that bass for a while, for years. I could never get out of that thing what Mike gets out of it, because I wasn't graced to do that. I practiced it in my home. I tried to play the role of a bass player because I wanted to pick that up. But when Mike got that bass, it just came naturally. He knew what was wrong with it, what needed to be fixed. Mike knew what strings to put on the bass. Mike knew who to take it to, and Mike knows how to play it, because that's the role God called him to play. It's not the only role God's called him to play, but it's the one we see every day. So I'll use that as an example. When we try to step outside of our role, not only will we not be accurate in fulfilling that role, but we won't be able to do the role God has called us to do, because I'm spending all my time trying to I just want to pray like Pastor D. And I've spent so much time trying to pray like Pastor D that I can't preach like Cemal. Or I spend so much time trying to preach like Pastor Wells that I can't pray like Cemal's called me to be. As long as I am trying to fulfill a role that I saw someone else do, the only reward I will ever get is being seen doing that role. And if I do that role well, someone might say I did a good job, but deliverance wouldn't come from that role. And see, the purpose of prayer is not for someone to hear that you prayed and say you sounded good. The purpose of preaching is not for someone to say, oh, you hit the ball out of the park this Sunday. The purpose of what we do is to be disciples, is to make disciples. And so if my fruit doesn't show that what I'm doing, someone else is now picking up on that and beginning to do that within the right that God gave them, then I am merely playing a role. And then there's another role, the reality TV star. It's really them, but events that you see on screen have been staged to make you think things are going a certain way, even if they aren't. And if the producer wants you to see envy and strife, then they're only going to play the scenes that involve them arguing. And you won't get to see any of the happy times, because that's the image that's being produced. Or if people want you to see something that's like, this is just a perfect family, they're rich, they have money, and they shop, that's all you're going to see. You're not going to see them budget in the budget books and looking at their check and seeing not enough money in the bank account, because those things do happen when you overspend. You're just going to see the good part. And the danger of seeing a reality TV star is it seems like it's real, but it's missing enough information that you will be thrown off. I was reading something that talked about the dangers of certain social media. And this specific danger was talking about Facebook. And what it was saying was people are able to show just what they want you to see. And so your perception as the reader is only that. And so if I'm only posting the wonderful things that are happening, you now get the impression, it's not my intention, but your impression is that only wonderful things are happening to me. And now you can look and say, oh, Cemal's got it going on. He's got this and he's got that. Oh, Cemal got a new bathroom. I didn't get a new bathroom, but I had a friend that got a new bathroom and I saw it on Facebook and said, oh man, he got a new bathroom. That was nice. Man, I called up that friend and said, man, I think I want to do my bathroom like yours. He said, don't do it. I saw the pictures. You saw the after pictures. Man, we pulled that back. We pulled that tub out, and we had this and that and that. We had to get this replaced, and that, man, it was not even worth it in the end. See, all I saw was the picture. And that's how the hypocrite prays. The hypocrite wants to be seen. And then he said, don't pray like the Gentile, the heathen. Now, when I think of the word heathen, now mind you, I've been in church a long time. Since I was like Samuel's age, I've been in church. Gave my life to the Lord when I was his age. I've seen a lot of good things and bad things. I've been called, and I've called some people heathens. I used to watch a TV show called Sanford and Son, and there was a character, Aunt Esther. And she was what they felt was a stereotypical Christian. And her line was, you old heathen. And what she was saying is, you are unchurched, you are not saved, and you are not on your way to heaven. And so we've associated that word heathen with that. The actual meaning of the word heathen comes from a Greek word, ethnikos. It means adapted to the genius or customs of a people, peculiar to a people, national. Studied to manners of language of foreigners, strange, foreign, English words. Our English words for this are ethnic or ethnicity. And so we look at our word ethnic, our word ethnicity. This has the Greek origin of this word heathen. And so when we're talking about heathens, we're not just talking about someone who's not saved. We're talking about a national, someone whose allegiance at this time was not to the Jews, but to non-Jew. We find ourselves nationals at time. Maybe not the word heathen that you think when you hear it, but I myself am proud to be an American. I'm glad God allowed me to be born in this country. We have some issues right now, but I'm glad that I was born here. And I imagine that people from France will vive la France because they're proud that they're from France. And that's good. But here he says, don't pray as the heathen prays. Don't pray as the national prays. They want to be heard. We find ourselves in a time right now where we need to be heard and we want to be heard. And we have to be careful that in our quest to be heard, we are aligning ourselves solely as a national, solely as an American, and not as a disciple. We come across situations where we see people being killed in the streets. We see African American men being killed as if black lives do not matter. And he said, the heathen with their vain repetition. Now, I believe that black lives matter, but I am telling you that me saying the words black lives matter is not enough to change it. Because I will find myself like the heathen with their vain repetition. Look, the heathen in this case was noble. He wasn't like the hypocrite who just wanted to be seen. The heathen had a need, a desire, and the heathen prayed to their God to make something happen. But the problem with the heathen was not that they had a desire. It was that they did not have a God that could make things happen. We have somewhat abandoned a God that could make things happen. And we've looked to people who aren't the most noble and moral people. We have elected in people who I would say maybe you should have elected them in because it's your duty to vote and it's their duty to do what they're called to do. But we know they're politicians. We know that, I mean, the age-old thing, politicians lie, right? We know these people don't always tell the truth. They just say sometimes what we want them to hear. And so while we should vote them in, our prayers should not be to them. And so when I'm saying Black Lives Matter, I need to make sure that I'm saying it to a God that can hear me. That I'm not just saying it, look, as a national who is desperate. I am a black man, and I am a desperate black man, but I am a disciple of the Most High God. And so I'm not saying don't go to your rallies. I'm not saying don't say the words, but I'm saying those better not be the only words that you say. Because what will happen is that either we will fail in our cause or we will succeed in our cause and flip the script. What happens in 4 years, someone else gets elected, and now a different group of people get persecuted. Now, we find ourselves looking for some deliverance now, and we want some relief from what's going on. But it wasn't long ago that the church felt like we were under attack brutally. And we turned ourselves to some people, a person who we thought could help. And I think we've given up some moral ground thinking that something would get better. We've placed our trust in a person. And the person we should have placed our trust in is our Father, who art in heaven. Hallowed be thy name. Now, some of us, when we hear certain names of certain politicians, we cringe. Maybe we didn't at first, but over the years, we cringe. Not just the one that just jumped in your mind, but some others too. I saw some ads where they were called Shady this and Actress that. I heard some names being called, but I thank God for a God that can be called holy, that can be called hallowed. Now, I've always keyed on the word Father here. And those that have taken sonship, you know what I'm talking about there. And those who haven't, I encourage you, the next time a session comes up, take Sonship School of the Firstborn. It has elevated my mind, my thinking, my very feeling to be more closely in line with just what the Word of God is saying. And I thank God that I was able to get a good portion of, I think, a good seminary education in the course of that course. So I thank God for School of the Firstborn, Sonship School of the Firstborn. So I've always keyed on the word Father. I want to key now to the word our. Because this prayer, he said, pray. He said, our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. We have identified as Americans. We have identified as African Americans. We have identified some as Republicans, some as Democrats. This prayer is for us, the disciples. And I believe that it is in this prayer and in this sermon that some dissension began, because there was a disciple named Judas. Judas believed, like many believed, that the Messiah was come to deliver the Jewish people from the oppressive Romans. Judas believed, as some of us believe, that the Messiah has come to deliver the African American male from the oppressive, some people say police, but I'll say from the oppressive system, a system of systemic racism. Judas experienced a systemic racism even in his time and thought that the Messiah's only purpose was to deliver him from that. And so now hearing the Sermon on the Mount and hearing him say that if your brother takes your coat, give him give it to him. If your brother, basically, we don't want to do eye for an eye anymore, tooth for a tooth. He takes it from you, you're giving to him. He slaps one cheek, you give him the other cheek to slap. Judas began to realize, I believe, right around here, this guy's not going to deliver us from the Romans. In fact, I think he's going to help the Romans too. And I think nationally we have found ourselves in a place where we have taken sides. And now I feel the only way to help me is to beat them. The only way that African Americans can truly make it is if the white nationalists don't make it. And we serve now a God who loves us all. A God who has called us to say, our Father. Meaning a God who has proclaimed that the white nationalist is my brother. That if I'm a Republican, that the Democrat is my brother. Judas had a problem with this. So much so that he sold himself out to the very Romans that he wanted deliverance from. And some of us may have sold ourselves out to some of the very politicians who don't stand for what we morally stand for. Because we saw ourselves as nationalists. We, the Christians, had become the heathen. Praying vain repetitions now to a God. What is prayer? You're praying to a deity who can give you what you need or want. And we have now taken our prayer and petitioned it to some people that we have made gods on earth so that they can give us what we need and what we want. And while it is their job to hear us, they cannot deliver us. He says, and then, so he goes on to say, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Judas all along thought that his will, Judas's will, was in line with the Father's will. And as long as Judas understood that God's will was in line with his will, he was okay. But when Judas began to pray, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, and realized, wait a minute, God's will and my will are not in alignment, he had a problem. Now, this is the place where we can continue down our road or we can realign. And the Lord's Prayer is calling us, Christian living is calling us to realign where we were going, what our will is, and get it in line with the will of the Father who is in heaven. I love it that he mentions that he's in heaven. He doesn't say our Father in America. He doesn't even say our Father over the earth. Our Father in heaven, meaning that if somehow there was a conflict between earth and Mars, God isn't even just the God of earth on our side, but God is the God of the heavens, the God of the universe, over all things. And so I can't get him to be on my side. I can only join in his side, realign my intentions. But here's the beauty of it. With that realignment, not only will he deliver me from my oppressors, but he will deliver my oppressors. And that is his intention. And the role of a disciple is not just so that your African American church can do well. Not just so that the Williamsburg area can have dominion over the spiritual evils that try and conquer Williamsburg. But the disciple wants to make, he says, go and make disciples of who? All. That means I'm discipling the young, the old, the Mexican, the yellow, the brown, the white, those who love, those who hate, those who I hated. Because Pastor already told us, if you do something bad to those you hate, you're only going to hate them more. And so Judas was upset. God is calling him now to be nice, to be not just nice, to go beyond niceness, to be godly. To be what is sometimes the hardest thing to be, a Christian. Sometimes it's easier to be the heathen and to look into my own self-interest. Sometimes it's easier to be the hypocrite and just play the role. Why? Because the reality is that it can be hard. The reality is that I'm training up a son and I'm praying that he doesn't get pulled over by the wrong cop someday, because my son is not as calm and gentle as his father. God called me to a calm and gentle calling. God has called him to an aggressive and assertive calling. God has called him to stir up some things. And I'm just praying that he doesn't stir up the wrong thing with the wrong person at the wrong time. And it cost him his life. A lot of us are praying that for our sons. In fact, I believe the very reason why I might be so calm is because my dad prayed that for me and taught me every chance he got to do what it takes to live and survive. But there's a new way here, our prayer to the Father, that not only is going to say, I want Samuel to be okay, but whatever counterpart that would have been the one that would have harmed him, I want them to be okay. I want them to be saved. And I'm not going to sell out Jesus for my agenda. I'm sold out to his agenda. He said, give us this day our daily bread. This is a prayer that we need to pray daily. We are praying to God daily. Let's not mistake vain repetitions with persistence, because vain repetitions are vain. Keyword vain, not repetition. Vain. So vanity is bad. Repetition of the right thing can be good, because if I begin to speak this word over myself, this isn't a vain repetition. This is a godly confession. So when we say Psalms 91, that is not a vain repetition. That's our covering. When we pray the Lord's Prayer, it's not a vain repetition. That is our covering. The difference between us and the hypocrite, us and the heathen, the difference between the Christian and the non-Christian is that we are covered by a God who can keep us, and we are covered by a God who, when we walk into a room, that room is now covered. And so if that person's not being kept and I bring my God into their space, now they can be kept. So when I come across my enemy, I'm trying to overtake the enemy, but I need to know who the enemy is. John, Don, whoever is not the enemy. The devil is the enemy. And if I can disciple John, I can make some things happen. I had a dream once. And this dream was just a dream. God was trying to show me. I don't believe he showed me what happened. He showed me he showed me how things are. I'll put it that way. So this is not a historical account. This is just something God showed me. And in the dream, there was a war in heaven. And the devil had taken angels on his side. And then there were some angels on God's side. And I was in heaven with these good angels. And there were some angels who used to be on the devil's side who had come over to God's side. And I was talking with them, and I said, what are they doing over there? He said, they're trying to figure out how to attack, but they don't know how to do it without getting close. And I said, why can't they get close? And they looked at me and they said, if they get close, the same thing that happened to me would happen to them. And I said, what's that? If they get too close to God, they would be so overwhelmed by the love of God that they would turn to his side. And they know that. And I'm saying to you, if we show the true love of God to people, it is powerful. It is not weak. It is mighty to the pulling down of strongholds. The love of God is the only thing that can save our young children, to save those that would be oppressed, to save those who would oppress someone. The love of God is the only thing powerful enough. And that's what Christian living is about. Being a disciple is about the love of God. It says, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And we'd always thought that the evil one was he that would look to oppress us. We thought the evil one was just those who would wish to harm us. But evil can be in my reaction to what's going on. And so, God, don't lead me into temptation. But when I find myself having led myself into temptation, or someone else is tempting me, God, in that moment, deliver me from evil. God, that I can speak the truth without trying to harm them. God, that I can say that Black Lives Matter without tearing up people's stores. God, that I can declare what is right without trying to, because the evil is when I give in to temptation, when I do the opposite of what God has called me to do. That is the evil that we need to be delivered from. There are people who died still slaves. There are people who died still under Jim Crow. And so if the only deliverance from evil is deliverance from that, then we could argue that they were never delivered from evil. But those people who still sung the hymns of God during their times of oppression, those slaves who took even those hymns and turned it into routes to freedom, those people who have taken the word of God and used it to march on Selma and to march and to organize peaceful boycotts, those people who have looked at the word of God and say, I will not render evil for evil, but I will show the love of God. And if we really look at it, we have gotten more I'm speaking to African-American people, but when I speak to African-Americans, I'm speaking to Americans. So white Americans and black Americans, we have gotten more from the love of God than we have gotten from warring from one another. And if we would all just show the love of God, study the word to understand what the love of God is, align ourselves, God, as your will in heaven is, that we will do that in earth. God, that my will would become your will, that I would be in alignment with you. For yours is the kingdom and the power. Look, the only person who has the power is God. But because he is the greatest power, we shall not be defeated. And so if we align ourselves with the power, with the love of God, and give the glory to him, not to Democrat, not to Republican. I love my pastor, but I thank God for what God has done through Pastor Wells, what God has done through the man and the woman of God. Because I'm a human, and I know me, and I know just as much as you see me up here preaching right now, that there are some parts of me that I hope that people don't see a lot. I'm not saying that there are parts that I have to hide, but there are parts that need to come out a lot less than other parts. And our pastor's human. And so Henry Wells doesn't have power, but God has given that man power, the power of God. And so I thank God for the man of God. And the man may not be perfect, but the man of God is. And so we have to look at people and bring that out of them. Because just as much, see, right now, we thank God for a man, and we see, and I believe not just what we see, his wife lives with him. I believe even what she sees, genuinely a good man. The good completely outweighs the bad. But there are some people that the bad seems to completely outweigh the good. But there is good in there, because we were all created in his image. And it is our goal, our mandate as disciples to disciple them.